section we call African Mirror, when we look into the mirror of our continent. And today, the African Development Bank Group has announced plans to launch a $5 million facility to assist small-holding farmers, with this bank facility expected to assist farmers eventually to the extent of $10 billion through multiple financial instruments. Online to tell us more about this development, looking after grassroots, as it were, Dr. Paul Kariuki, Executive Director of the Democracy Development Program at the University of KwaZulu Natal and convener at the Africa Policy Circle. Dr. Kariuki, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Shafiq, for having me on the show, and good afternoon to your listeners.
It's quite encouraging to see what I've just introduced, the fact that the African Development Bank Group is looking towards creating a facility to unlock finance for small-holding farmers and agribusinesses across the continent, particularly the small-scale people.
Yes, that's really important, and I think it's a very timely call by the African Development Bank, given where the circumstances that are surrounding our continent at the moment, as far as food insecurity is concerned, and the importance of the governments on the continent scaling up their participation to arrest the situation before it gets worse than what it is right now. I think one of the few things I'd like to discuss on the background as we introduce the conversation is to notice that actually our continent should not be having a situation of food insecurity, given the fact that we have, as a continent in the sub-Saharan Africa, around 65% of global arable land is on our continent. That's significant. The second thing is that we are also blessed as a continent with significant weather patterns that are conducive to support agricultural production, despite the challenges that now that we're confronting of climate change. In the main, we have significant influence in terms of our food security, production, if we can be able to mitigate these kind of challenges that are, climate change is posing on us. And of course, with this kind of initiatives where we see financing institutions like African Bank coming on board to support the initiatives that will enhance smallholder farmers, to be productive, more productive than they are now, is a positive and a welcome step. I think it's important to also to underscore that smallholder farmers on our continent generally are very significant contributors to the African economies. And even though most of their farming is really destined for livelihood support at a very local level, it is important now in the face of food insecurity and the challenges that we are confronting because of climate change that investments be turned towards their direction so that they can enhance our food productivity on our continent.
No, I think everybody would agree 100% with that, to underline the fact that the majority of farmers in sub-Saharan Africa are small farmers in any case. And I think it's significant that the African Development Bank is taking this seriously, because the IMF or the World Bank, and we don't want to borrow money from them because the terms are quite restrictive. But for big organizations like that, small farmers, the details are too small for them. So it's really encouraging. I think the African Development Bank is putting its finger on the pulse, because, as you correctly say, it's the small farmers who, going forward, are going to produce the food and become the bread brass basket for African society at large.
Indeed it is. And I think also the African Development Bank is also provoking the continental leadership to start rethinking mechanisms to alleviate barriers or challenges that these smallholder farmers do face because of either poor political leadership that is not interested in investing in them, or deliberate, assumption that things will work out for them without any intervention externally or internally, and of course it's a bad assumption, because what has been happening now, as the continent becomes more and more food insecure, such farmers are lost in between They are not able to scale up their productivity so that they can meet even the needs of the local communities where they are based. They are also not able to produce beyond survival consumption, so that they can feed the nation and the nation can have surpluses, to be able even to export to influence its own GDP. So there is challenges that they've been facing. And I think African Development Bank has come at a very important time to provoke national governments to rethink several things that will open up opportunities from smallholder farmers. So first of the challenges that they do face, I think it's important to say in relation to the bank, it's limited access to finances, which makes it very, very difficult for most of these smallholder farmers to be able to, access collateral that can help them, build up their farming enterprises. The next thing, of course, is helping them to navigate the infrastructure challenges. Most of these poor farmers do not have infrastructure that can support, from production or from planting to actual distribution. So things like having dams where they can harvest water in case of rainfall, so that they can have sufficient water to water their crops. They don't have that. They lack that. They also lack, storage facilities in most of these places because they are located in rural areas. They're still using traditional, conventional methods of storage of their produce, which sometimes is not sustainable, especially given the exposure to climate change effects. And of course, we don't see them also being given support for the post-harvest, mechanisms to ensure that they can conserve their food to sustain them throughout a period and be food secure. Those kind of challenges are also compounded by significant levels of illiteracy around business and marketing of agricultural practices for their crops, and how they can use, for example, technologies to mitigate against all kinds of things that can happen to their crops, ranging from insect manifestation to ability to understand weather patterns using technology. So there is a little bit of that lack of education and training to these farmers that is needed. And so I think when a private sector institution like the African Development Bank comes in on board, these are kind of challenges that can be easily mitigated through financing and in collaboration with national governments and national agricultural societies in the different countries to support the small holding farmers to scale up in ways that is sustainable, effective, and influential to the local, national economies.
And just to emphasize the need to give access to African smallholder farmers, this article that I've got here in front of me says that currently only 6% of African smallholder farmers have access to credit. And this is also another important point that you've been talking about. Less than 20% use improved seeds. In other words, the seed stock is old, and what happens is that the crops tend to be susceptible to failure. So it's quite a challenge, isn't it? But I mean, if we can triple the numbers to 18% of smallholder farmers having access to credit, that will certainly make a big difference, won't it?
It will make a huge difference, Shafiq, and especially this is where the national governments come in on board to play an active role in various ways. One is to facilitate conducive policy shifts that really focus on the interests of smallholding farmers and make sure that they're actively involved in the process of formulating this process up to the decision-making processes. And that's why I think it's important that politics are removed out of this kind of conversations that really do affect citizens at the household level. If we can depoliticize this kind of processes and allow authentic conversations that are really genuinely interesting in uplifting the welfare of small-scale farming, it will really move our continent forward, especially in the face of food insecurity and malnutrition and all these other things that we're really battling with because of the domino effects of lacking enough resources. The second thing, of course, for governments to do in support of this kind of initiative is to ensure that also the infrastructure that these farmers need is provided for and budgeted for in the national budgets. Right now, only less than 6% of national governments do actively allocate resources geared towards agricultural production. We have significant funding towards military and defense, We have significant funding around other social aspects of our economy like housing and health and education, and there is nothing wrong with that. But how would you meet all this when you have a weak population that cannot be able even to feed itself and fight off diseases? So there is also a call that while the private sector like African Development Bank comes on board, national governments must also play a significant role in allocating significant resources from the national budgets towards this kind of initiatives. Because if we do not do that, we will continue to externally depend on our international partners and friends who do not give us their resources for free. So it's going to become even more harder when we have to look for resources outside of our continent to support things we can do for ourselves as Africans. We have a huge resource like these 65% of arable land on our continent. We shouldn't be begging for money and we shouldn't be begging for food. But there has to be policy shifts that really, focus on the small-scale farmers, that give them the resources they need, create conducive environment for them to access markets, support them with the distribution marketing processes, invest in technologies that will help them to scale up their production and depoliticize every process along the food chain.
Absolutely, and unfortunately we have to leave it there. It's African Mirror. We've been talking about the African Development Bank Group ring-fencing $10 billion for smallholding farmers, and lots of African leaders who have responsibility saying that we really do have to start eyeing food security, and the small farmer is inevitably the answer. But a special thanks to Dr. Paul Kariuki, Executive Director of the Democracy Development Program at the University of KZN and the convener at the Africa Policy Circle. Dr. Paul Kariuki, as always, it's been a pleasure.